Welcome to Unforbidden Truth. I'm Andrew. Today I'll be speaking with convicted murderer and convicted school shooter Erica Hainstock, formerly known as Eric Hainstock. The case of Eric Hainstock centers on a tragic school shooting that took place on September 29th, 2006 at Weston High School in Kansas, Wisconsin. At just 15 years old, Hainstock brought a shotgun and a handgun to school after a morning argument with his principal, John Klang, over disciplinary issues. Hainstock had a history of behavioral problems, including alcohol abuse and prior disciplinary incidents, which contributed to ongoing tensions at school. Shortly after arriving, he entered the school office and shot Principal Klang, who later died from his injuries. In the immediate aftermath, Hainstock was confronted by a teacher, Dave Thompson, who managed to subdue him before further harm could occur. Police arrived quickly and took Hainstock into custody. Investigations revealed that he had obtained the firearms from a friend's home and had consumed alcohol earlier that day. The incident shocked the small community, highlighting concerns about youth violence, access to firearms, and the warning signs that may have been overlooked. Hainstock was charged as an adult with first-degree intentional homicide. In 2008, he pleaded no contest and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Here's my interview with convicted school shooter and convicted murderer Erica Hainstock.
Okay, my name is Erica Hainstock, previously known as Eric Jordan Hainstock. I am from Sauk County, in the state of Wisconsin. In 2006, I was arrested and confined for a first-degree intentional homicide, in which I had ended up shooting my principal, and I wound up being convicted of that, and I'm serving a life imprisonment with the eligibility for extended supervision after 30 years of initial confinement. Currently, I'm housed in the Oshkosh Correctional Facility in Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
So, can you describe your childhood environment and how you remember your early years?
So before my dad got remarried, him and I actually had a really good relationship. It was like I was the center of his world. We got along very well, and I ended up being, when he had met Priscilla, her and I got along actually fairly well. It was after they got married that everything started to shift. And that's when everything fell apart. That's where I started getting child abuse, to the extent that, even if I lied or if I cursed by, default, and they considered saying God as a curse. So, like, if I did that, I get smacked in the mouth, and then they'd force dried jalapeno peppers in my mouth, and I'd have to hold him there for a period of time. And then they would do other punishments, like, I get spanked with a braided leather belt or other objects that they would have in their vicinity. And it would wind up becoming where if I fought against it while it was happening, they would start over. It was a whole thing. The school knew that I had issues learning, so they ended up convincing my parents to put me on, at the time, what was the medication was Ritalin. And when I was on that, I was actually doing really good and I was excelling. Parents didn't like me on Ritalin, so they ended up removing me from Ritalin, which had more behavioral problems along with everything else that was going on in my life. I didn't really see my biological mother too much. When I was 6, she ended up signing off her parental rights. And that kind of makes you feel highly unwanted, because you're wondering, what did you do to have somebody not want you? And she ended up doing that. And so Priscilla ended up taking full custody of me. Well, at that point, I would see Lisa, which was my biological mother. I'd end up seeing her once every year and a half to 2 years, and sometimes I would even go to 3 years without even seeing her. And when I'd see her, it was like I was the focal point in her world, but that was because it was a convenience to her at that point. And that killed me because it strained a lot of the relationship I had with both of my siblings. I didn't really get to grow up with them, so I only got to see them once in a while. At one point, the Sauk County Child Protective's CPS ended up taking me from my parents' custody and placing me with my grandmother because my dad had kicked me on my side multiple times and ended up bruising my side. And it came to a point where, in his case, they're like, well, if you're convicted, you're going to have to, give up all your firearms. Well, my dad's not going to give his firearms up. So he was like, that ain't going to happen. He says, you can keep the kid. And so, you know, they ended up eventually putting me back in their custody, which just taught them how to get away with abuse in another way. So my strain wasn't. It was not an easy thing with the family. From the age of 2 to 6, I was sexually assaulted by one of my stepbrothers. His name was not Marty. It was Tony, and Marty was his father. But Tony ended up abusing me for 4 years. Well, they found out about that, and then they kept us separated, and the government didn't do nothing there. Then, later on, I ended up going to Weston School District down the road, and things transpired with me and John, and it wasn't good, and I ended up reacting to that after 2 years, and that's when I did what I did. I never wanted to kill the man. I actually had a 22 and everything. I thought, it's a small bullet, it's a small caliber bullet. This thing gonna kill somebody. Because when we go hunting, we're told that use a large caliber bullet to secure that you kill the large game. So I didn't think a 22 was gonna result in his death, and I was extremely wrong in that regard. You know, and that's something that I end up paying with every day. Because of my not my lack of knowledge. You know, in that.
Right. And we'll talk about the incident in a little bit, but before we talk about that, no, it's okay. It's okay. Can we talk about your school experiences before that? Like, what was school like for you socially and academically before the incident took place?
Well, we actually moved. It was like seven times in like 6 years, or 8 times in like 6 years period. So it came a point where I didn't even unpack my stuff. So we bounced around schools a lot. And when I would go from school to school,
other than properly placed attorney calls may be monitored and recorded.
When you go from school to school to school, you got to reset up and get to know people and gain friends. Well, I was scrawny. I didn't really fit in because, well, I didn't get to get the new clothing that everybody else was getting. I didn't get the new games everybody got. It was what it was. And so the ones I got along with were other poor kids like myself. And as crazy as it is, I look back and it's like, man, I kind of, being in here, you look back and it's like, I wish I was there. As bad as it sucked, you wish you were there. And, I used to get bullied. I used to get picked on. And I've gotten stuffed in lockers. I've gotten swirlies. I've gotten straight up beat up, and it compiling with what goes on at home, you don't feel like you ever have a safe space. And so school can become a horror, I was a straight F student. The only classes I excelled in were choir and art. I always aced my art class, because I love doing art.
So did you feel that teachers or staff understood that what you were going through at the time with the bullying and conflicts at school?
No, I actually had one teacher once, this kid, his name was Blaza, and he was actually beating me up, and a teacher literally just walked right by. And she says, "Well, I'm off the clock. It's not my job no more." And when I got home, I actually called the cops, and the cops didn't do anything. It's when the police tend to drop the ball over and over and over, you feel that you can't go to them for help when you're put back into an abusive home. You can't go to them for help because nobody's listening. It's I've had teachers that gunned on me. Like, one of them, he just literally would always go out of his way just to mess with me. And I know that a lot of people think that, well, kids always say that. Kids always say that. But when you got other students that he blatantly allows to listen to music when they're doing their schoolwork in class, and I listen to music with the same setup, trying to do my work because it's a way I can focus, and you're getting on me saying I can't do that, but yet you allowed everybody else that had a Walkman to do that, and then kicking me out of class. So when I'd get kicked out of class, I'd end up getting a detention, and detention resulted in more suspensions, and suspensions resulted in getting beaten at home. So it becomes a revolving door of just anger and aggravation and frustration with everything that's going on. And you resent that teacher because what's going on isn't fair. And you're trying, like with mathematics, I tried to explain to teachers I can't get it. And I had this same teacher say, "Well, I just taught this to you last week. How do you not got it?" And you're like, I don't know, and they're not trying to find out why you're not getting it. Come to find out, after I got locked up, they learned that I could barely even multiply, let alone divide. So I could add and subtract, and that was about it. So no wonder why I wasn't getting anything that this teacher was telling me. So, but yeah, I clashed with a lot of the teachers, and at times you do feel like everything's against you, but I also know that goes into a lot of the paranoia that I had, where feeling like you couldn't trust anybody and feeling like you were just alone. There's times where I wish that I had reached out to some teachers, and even today I look back and it's like I wish I had reached out to certain teachers and told them what was going on in my life and expressed why I was so messed up, and I wish I had the capabilities to express that I didn't know how to do this or the other thing, and that's why I couldn't get forward in my grades at all.
So what were some of the coping mechanisms, whether they were healthy or unhealthy, that you relied on during difficult school years?
So I used to love smoking weed. Um, and so I would smoke weed when I got up in the morning because my parents would wake me up and leave, and they go to work or whatnot. So I would just smoke some weed. I'd smoke weed before I went to bed, and I'd smoke some weed at school. It was just a way for me to calm down, um, which led into other types of narcotic uses and abuses. I ended up doing cocaine for a while, and that was not a help. You think everything helps at the time, but it doesn't. And then I started self-isolating into my basement more because I felt comfort in the basement, which was weird because it was very it was a dirty, grimy place to be. And I love to isolate into the woods because when I was there and nobody else was. And if I had my dog with me, that's why I absolutely love dogs. beyond belief because they're so loving, compassionate, and loyal. They're always there. They never judge you. And they don't care who you are. As long as you give them the same love and respect back. And so my dogs were a huge thing for me. That was a big coping thing because I would go out and just hug my dog, and there's times I would just sit there and cry. I had three of them. I had Buddy, I had Pebbles, and I had Roxy. Two blue tick coonhounds and a Rottweiler. So you try to do everything you can. Try to just go from day to day to day. And there's times where I resorted in, self-mutilation because it gave you some form of control, no matter how minute it was in your life. It was a form of control that was allotted to you. And sometimes it makes you even feel more alone sometimes. And when that happens, you just don't know what to do with it. And when you can't cry because you're told every time you cry, I'll give you something more to cry about, and you're not supposed to cry, this is what you're supposed to be, and you just can't live up to those standards, But coping mechanisms is a really hard thing. I love biking, so that was a huge thing. Fishing was the best thing. I loved it because after school, when no one was home, I would run off down to the creek and I'd take my pole with me and I'd go fishing, even if it was just to catch some minnows or something. It was relaxing for me, just to sit there and listen to the water.
So how would you describe your emotional state in the months leading up to the incident at school?
More strained. My mother and I, we were arguing a lot more. My drug addiction was a lot harder at that point, and it was weird because sometimes my mental status and everything felt, how do I say it, manic. I could be happy and then I'd just be angry. And Priscilla and I, we would actually come to wrestling matches because we couldn't get along. And at the time, I hated her so much, and I used to tell her all the time how much I disliked her and that she was not my mother. She was never going to be. And that was even more as an anger with being abandoned by my own mother. So how dare you try to stand in this position?
1 minute remaining.
I'm going to call you back, okay?
Okay. All right.
All right. So know that it is me. Just accept the call. You get to a point where you don't think that there's any light, and you don't like where you're going because you've seen everybody. There's like no escape. My behavior became more manic to where I couldn't control what I was feeling, and I didn't know how to express what I was feeling. And when things are going on in your life that you can't expose to those around you because you feel that they're not going to trust you, they're not going to believe you, instead they're going to think that you're lying about it, you don't have nobody to turn to. And then some of the things are just so appalling that you can't even express it to your grandmother, who is literally that person that you could share anything with, because she wasn't going to judge you. But some of the things were just that bad that you couldn't even share it with her because of the fear that she wouldn't understand what was going on. I mean, I had a cousin that I used to get high with her, and I would break down and express to her what was going on, and she wanted to tell everybody what was going on in my life, but I begged her not to, And it was crazy because, even back then, everybody in my hometown, they would be like, "Oh, you're a fag, you're a fucking fag, you're a homo," and they treat you different because of that. even though that there was no confirmation as to who I was. And which makes him even more afraid is that you can't express to anybody who you are. Because every time family member sees you in girls' clothing with makeup, you'd get punished for it because, in quote, I'm not going to have a fag living in my household. So you can't even be yourself. So it kind of solidifies that you try to live for everybody else, but it's too much to take in.
So you mentioned like being manic, and it sounds like there were some mental health issues going on at the time. Were you diagnosed as a teenager with any mental health issues?
So when I was growing up, they diagnosed me with severe ADHD. Only later on, during my reverse waiver hearing, did they diagnose me with severe depression and borderline personality disorder. A lot in compilation with the severe ADHD.
Okay.
So they wanted to try to say bipolar, but because I was too young, they couldn't do that.
So let's talk about the incident that took place. What do you remember most clearly about the day of the shooting?
Fear. It was a fear with the mixed of emotion that I have to protect myself. I know what was going to happen to me that day. And it was something that I didn't expose to nobody. I didn't even tell my family until I was 18 years old what was really going on with me and John Klang. Because because when I was 13, I had started talking to him about what was going on in my life, how I was so frustrated because people were saying all this stuff about me and the abuse. And I even told him that, I felt this way, but I didn't know how to deal with it. And he ended up using that to his advantage and turning it against me. And one day we went to the locker rooms and he was like, "Hey," because I was asking him, I said, "Well, what are we going down here for?" Because I was talking to him about being beaten up and bullied by a couple of the kids. And he's like, "Well, I just got to check the football equipment and make sure it's secured because, caught word that people are taking equipment and stuff like that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." I believed it because that's what I was going to be doing. I was going to take some of the equipment and I was going to sell it to a couple other kids in another school district. So, and when we got in there, he had asked me to pick up some of the helmets that were on the floor, and he ended up sexually assaulting me. And that went on and off for 2 years. And nobody raised an eyebrow to it or anything. The fact was, I'm still baffled to this day why nobody caught on, because today they call it grooming. Back then, they thought it was just a good deed. You got a teacher the principal that's going out of his way and giving clothes and shoes and hygiene and stuff like that to one student. And that was me. And everybody's like, "Oh, he's so nice for doing that." But he's still the one that went out of his way to have me shower at the school and told teachers that if I was late to class in the morning, it was because I was taking a shower, And it just opened up another avenue for him to be able to do what he wanted to do. But nobody pinged in on that. Well, dealing with that for 2 years, and because he had even told me, like, "Well, it's not worth telling nobody because who's going to believe you?" Like, all the time you're abused, nobody did anything. And he says, you're always acting up in school, you're always in trouble, you're a failing student, and we know you get high. So who's going to believe you over me? And I believed it. I believed it for years. And even up until I got incarcerated. Well, it came a point where that was a homecoming. It was the very end of the week, and he hadn't did anything all week, so I assumed he would do something that day. And that morning, I just couldn't deal with it. I ended up grabbing a 20 gauge shotgun, some shells, and a 22 pistol, and a box of those shells, and then drove the pickup truck to the high school. When I got to the high school, that's when I got out, pulled out the shotgun, pulled all the shells out of the box, put them in my pocket, and put the pistol in my pocket too. I was wearing a hoodie. And one of the janitors had seen me, and he thought I was a prop. I walked through the door, and I had told everybody, I said, everybody get in the fucking office. This is for real, because I assumed John was in the office. And, the janitor, he ended up pushing me against the wall, and I just let go of the shotgun and rolled away from him. I ended up pulling out the pistol, and everybody just scattered. And when everybody scattered, the hall was empty, and I was getting ready to walk toward the office, and I saw a kid that I knew. I had gotten in an argument with him probably a couple weeks prior to this, and he was in the Steve and Eva's boys home thing for troubled youth or whatever. And to this day, I can't figure out who he is, because if I could, I could prove that the key witness committed perjury on the stand. Prove that he did. But he comes out into the hallway. He drinks from the bubbler. He turns around. I pointed the gun at him. I said, "What do you want to do now?" And he ran off, because I was just trying to scare the kid. But I heard John down the hall. He goes, "Where's everybody going?" And so I walked down the hall, and he saw me, and he asked me, he says, "Well, what is this? Is that real?" And I had told him, I said, "What the fuck do you think?" And he had, it was at that time, he says, I'm sorry, it won't ever happen again." It didn't make me feel better, him saying it. It angered me, because it was like he just thought saying, "I'm sorry," was going to fix it. When he realized it wasn't going to change how I was feeling, he lunged toward me, and I had the gun pointed low on his body, because I was going to shoot him in his genitals. When he lunged toward me, I pulled the trigger, and it went through his right leg. And I pulled the trigger again, and it went toward the left part of his lower abdomen. Mind you, I never shot a pistol in my life. And I turned away from him, and we slammed into the lockers. And when we did that, I was pulling the pistol away downward, and it was tangled in my hoodie, which was very baggy. When I did that, it ended up going off again. And that one, it hit the skin on the side of the head and grazed him. And we rolled off the lockers and struggled and fell to the floor. At the point, he kept trying to grab the gun, and in my mind at that time, I thought he was not trying to get it away. I thought he was going to utilize it. I had no idea at the time in my own mind what was going on. So flung the gun behind us, and when that happened, he rolled off of me. It was messed up because it's something I wish every day that I could take back. You never forget it, and I'll never forget what he looked like. And they took me to a police station because I didn't. The plan wasn't to be leaving the school in the first place. I planned on shooting him in his genitals and then forcing the police to kill me. That was my plan. And when they took me to the police station, they left me cuffed up for a few hours and gave me food to eat. And then there was blood on my hands, and I was covered in blood. I was still in the building, and I had ended up asking the police if I could wash my hands. And he was like, "No, you can't wash your hands. We might need to swab you for gun residue or whatnot." So here I am. I'm hungry because I haven't really eaten anything in a minute, and I'm just emotionally and mentally
1 minute
drained,
remaining.
and everything's going crazy. And so I eat the food, and of course that doesn't look good on camera, but I'm gonna have to call you back.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
All right. I eat this food, and of course it doesn't look good in court because they're like, look at how heartless they are. They're eating food with blood in their hands. Well, I wasn't given an option to be able to wash my hands. They told me I couldn't. And I know that I could have not eaten, but juvenile, dumb, not thinking, going through shock of what's going on. Then it comes to the interview, So Detective Laura and Elizabeth Fiegels, who works for the Department of Justice, comes in, and they want to read me my Miranda rights. And then in the state of Wisconsin, they read them to you, and then you have to sign them. You initial each right, and then you sign it. So no matter how you cut it, it's an agreement, and it's a legal binding form. It is a contract. And so they had me do that. And I said, well, I don't have money for a lawyer when they read me that right. And they're like, well, just reread that. So they reread it to me. And I still don't have money for a lawyer, and I'm kind of in my own messed up way. I'm kind of indicating I don't have a lawyer. I don't have money for a lawyer. I'm indicating I want a lawyer, but I'm not telling them I need a lawyer. So they end up telling me, well, then you sign here. So I sign it. And they say, well, now that you've signed, you've agreed to talk to us, so now we're going to talk. There's no, do you want to talk to us? There's no, do you want your attorney now that you signed your rights? There's nothing like that. It is, you've agreed to talk to us, now we're going to talk. Well, under the tort law, juveniles, anybody under 18 cannot sign a contract, agreement, or legal binding form without a parent, guardian, or guardian ad litem present to protect the best interest of the delinquent or juvenile. And so the signing of my rights really is a violation in itself. So what made it worse is my parents didn't even know that I was locked up. They had to find out through police popping up at the house and through my aunt. And so they ended up, my aunt and my father come to the jail, and they demand to see me. And the jail goes, well, we're not going to do that. They said, we're interrogating them. Well, so my dad goes, well, you need to tell them not to speak without an attorney, right? Well, we're not going to do that. We're interrogating them. So they knew, had a parent or guardian been there, they would not have had that interrogation, And nowhere in the interrogation did I say intended to kill John Klang, just that I intended to shoot him. You know, and it's fucked up. I accept the responsibility for what I've done. You know, that's I did the actions, and I respect my responsibility for that. You know, I sat in booking for 3 days, and then after 3 days, they placed me in an intake pod for about two months, and then finally released me into general population. You know, in the jail.
So were you in jail as a juvenile offender or charged as an adult with other adults in the jail?
They had charged me as an adult. You know, I'm a first-time offender. I have no juvenile delinquency record. And in the state of Wisconsin, if they're charging you with first-degree intentional homicide, even at the age of 10, it's a mandatory waiver to the adult correctional setting. So they charged me as an adult. I had to try to fight to get back to juvenile court. So I was trying to fight to go back, but my lawyers didn't even argue all 3 prongs that they were supposed to. They failed to. They didn't even argue one of the prongs. They argued 2 and left the 3rd one in hiatus. You know, uh, and then they didn't even appeal the decision that the court made. So, you know, I was left in the adult criminal system.
So were you you were with other adult offenders as a 15-year-old at the time, correct?
Yeah. I was in pod 160 at the Sauk County Jail. It was crazy because I knew a few of the people that were there, you know, and it was kind of interesting to be there with them. And then a lot of the people on the pod, a lot of them didn't mess with me because they knew that I knew people. They knew that of people I knew. It was just, they knew it was a messed up situation. So a lot of people didn't mess with me. At the time, our county was contracted with Rock County inmates, so they were bringing Rock County inmates up there. I caught flack from them. You know, eventually they brought Dane County inmates in, and you know they tried beefing with me a few times. And I had a guy on my unit. His last name was Nodolf, and man, he would always go out of his way to snitch me out for anything. I had gotten 2 tattoos done. They stuck me in the hole for those because, you know, he ended up telling on me. And there's a few other times I ended up going to the hole because of him. You know.
But you were never like sexually abused or assaulted or anything like that as a juvenile by other adult offenders?
No, not when I was in the county jail.
So you went to trial, correct? You didn't take a plea deal?
Yeah, so the DA tried to offer me life in prison. They wanted me to plead guilty to first-degree intentional homicide, which is life in prison. And she offered me the eligibility of release after 20 years of initial confinement. It's not a guaranteed to go home. It just means that you're able to apply to go home at that time. I turned it down because I wasn't going to plead guilty to something I was not guilty of. I told my attorneys, I said, hey, I will plead guilty to first or second degree reckless endangerment for 20 years incarceration, 20 years on extended supervision. You know, I'm guilty of a reckless homicide. I never wanted to kill John. And I even stand by that to this day. I understand what I've done to that family. There's nothing I can do to fix it. And it's a debt that I could never pay. It's a non-replaceable debt. You can never weigh that back because you can't give them back their family member, you know. So I ended up going to trial because I had my lawyer, they're like, well, we're not even going to offer that to the DA because they're not going to take it, you know. So my lawyers didn't even try to get me the plea deal. And little I know, I could have contacted the DA myself, but I didn't even know that at the time because I was a kid. So why would I know anything of the legal system? And so I go to trial. I ended up having a guy on my jury that worked with my victim's brother, a substitute teacher from another school district that was also on my jury, a guy who was a victim of a stabbing when he was down south on my jury, and some woman trying to claim that she was a babysitter of mine at one point on the jury. It doesn't sound like a fair jury to me, you know. And so they ended up finding me guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. The next day, I was put up for sentencing. The following day, they gave me. At this point, the DA was pushing for 50 years before I was eligible to file for a release, which is 30 years over what they were offering initially, which is still a life sentence, by the way. And then my lawyers pushed for the initial 20 years that was offered. The judge ended up saying, well, we're going to give you 30 years before you're eligible for release. That means that I'm pretty much eligible for release at roughly around the age that John was when he passed away.
So how did you feel after they told you that and you were handed down that sentence?
As crazy as it sounds, the being found guilty hurt the most, destroyed me more that way, because I knew I was not guilty of intentional homicide. It's one of those things where, unlike most people, I'm not sitting there going, oh, let me off, let me off, let me off. I didn't do nothing. I didn't do nothing. I admitted I did something wrong. I knew I did something wrong and that I should be doing time for it. And so that's something that I had no problem taking my lickings for. But I did not intend to kill this man. And I was found guilty of it. Not once in my case did I ever say I intended to kill him. And so it was a whole thing where when they say that you're guilty of this, it strips away everything you have in your mind and heart, because you know that's not what you've done. At that point, you know you're already serving a life sentence. So when they say 30 years, it's not a guarantee of anything. I'm still here till I die, if they choose to. So the sentencing wasn't as harsh to me as the verdict.
So a little bit ago, I asked you if you ever been assaulted as a juvenile, and you said no. Have you ever been assaulted after getting to prison, whether you were still a juvenile then or as an adult?
I was actually, it was my first it was actually not the first cellmate, it was my second cellmate. They placed me in the room with a guy named Brandon Prisk. He had actually talked security into putting him in the room with me, stating that I'll look out for them, I'll make sure nobody takes advantage of them in any form or fashion, make sure that they know the ropes, this isn't my first rodeo. So they believed him. We were in the room for a while, and then, I noticed that he was community friendly, to the LGBT community. Like, he's community friendly. And at the time I had told him, I was like, because I felt that I can confide in him. So I told him, I was like, there's time, I feel like I'm in the wrong body. I feel like a woman, but I'm trapped. And he goes, oh, so you're transgender. I didn't know what the hell it was. I had never heard that term before that point, Because where I grew up, it was anything that's not straight is a fag. That's what they say. That's what they put you at. And I was like, oh, so that's what that's called. So I had a name.
1 minute remaining.
I'll call you back. I gotta go get my meds real quick, and I'll call you right back.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
Yeah. So like, he talks to these guys and to talk security into getting into my room, and they agree. Yeah, go ahead. So anyways, so I tell him about this, and it was shortly after that he actually grabbed me, and he had me give him oral, and then he ended up raping me, and this ended up going on for about 8 months at that point. My family thought something was going on, and the security thought something was going on, so they ended up pulling me out, and security was like, what's going on? Is this transpiring? And of course, I'm not going to tell him anything because it's a horrible situation if you do, you know. And it's like, no. Well, you've been acting real funny and you're distanced from everybody, and nothing's adding up. And we noticed that there's been a lot of movement in a lot of things for him. So they're like, well, we're going to remove him from your room and place him in the North Cell Hall. And so they ended up taking and moving him out. And then, the lady that was working, the one that was talking to me, she says, you seem very relieved right now. I said, I'm not relieved. Okay, you're moving him. It is what it is, you know. But I was ecstatic inside because it's like, oh, thank God he's not going to be in the room with me no more, And you can't tell nobody because at that point you'd be known as a snitch, and in everybody else's view, a fag, and then in their view, even more, somebody who could not protect themselves, and that puts a target on your back more than what would already be there. So I just trudged on and kept my mouth shut, to the best that I could.
And what did anything happen to him? Like, did you end up telling what happened, or did you just keep it a secret to this day?
I had kept it a secret for a long time, but I ended up telling a friend of mine who had talked to him. And she's like, yeah, she goes, I always thought it was kind of weird that he gravitated towards certain types of groups, and they are like, and they always tried to give the excuse that security just didn't help them move out. And security had a legitimate reason for removing him from my house, but he ended up passing away from narcotic use back when I was in Boscobel. I found that out through my friend because they're like, yeah, they ended up going to hospital and they had an infection around their heart and they got over that, but then it was some type of fungal infection in their lungs that ended up killing them. But I never went out of my way to make it a thing where he got a case or anything, because in my view, it wouldn't have done nothing for me, nothing positive, and it would have actually made my maximum security time a hell of a lot harder than it already was.
So how have your views on both violence and conflict changed while incarcerated?
Could you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, so like how do your views on like violence in general, like I guess like inside of prison and outside of prison, and conflict when it comes to like like when some people like they'll have conflict, they'll take out a gun or take out a knife. Like how like have your views changed? Like, do you feel like you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I get it. So I was in Green Bay Corrections at the age of 16. That's the worst maximum security in the state of Wisconsin. I got there when I was 16, and I did 8 years there. And neutrons. You got neutrons that walk around. Those are people that aren't grouped up with anybody. And then you got people that group up. I ended up taking and I was putting in work for the skinheads, which was it's another it's a white supremacist organization, and I ended up being prosecuted by them after a period of time. And then eventually I was recruited into the ranks, and I worked up the ranks to where I was holding the house, which is pretty much holding the yard. I was very, the organization gave me, I guess, a reason to embrace violence. So under the premise of, under the guise of honor, because it was one of those things that was, well, it's dishonorable to allow somebody to disrespect you. So therefore, to gain your honor, you had to react to that. So if somebody was disrespecting one of my brothers or disrespecting me, I reacted in violence. If you owed me some money or owed one of the brothers money, I reacted in violence. It went hand in hand with what it was. If one brother went, a lot of brothers went. And the inmates weren't the only ones that were off limit. Everybody was up for grabs. It didn't matter if you were inmate or other, and it was a scary thought at how far I had gone down the rabbit hole, because I had got to a point where we had been worn out with a group of vice lords, and I had to take a bunch of straight stunting magazines that I had gotten from my neighbor to a wood shop with me, and I drilled holes in them, and I made a body vest. And I ended up having to make myself a weapon that could protect me in case somebody did attack me. It was around that time, it was in 2014, that I started to really look at a lot of my actions and contemplate if they were even right or not. And really self-reflect on who I was as a person, and self-reflect on my actions and how they actually hurt others. I didn't like causing pain to people. I didn't like hurting people. And it was like fighting your own will all the time, just battling it out with myself. And so I ended up getting transferred out of Green Bay Corrections to CCI in 2015. I got to CCI in 2015. They didn't know if they wanted to give me a cellie or not, so they kept me in a single cell for a small period of time before they gave me a roommate that they knew I could be in the room with. I told them right out, I said, you give me a roommate that's aggressive, I said, that's what you're going to get. You give me somebody who's calm, collective, and chill, I'm calm, collective, and chill. So at the time, I was still gangbanging, because I had gotten there, I was still on count, and I had to check in with the householder there. I gave him all my PRC papers, my legal work, and everything. He said, "Oh, we don't need that. We already know who you are." And I was like, "It doesn't matter. That's the law. That's what you're supposed to do, But after a period of time, I was in the room with this guy, and he said to me one day, he says, "You're an adult." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm an adult." He says, "Why are you allowing somebody else's rules that they call laws to control your life?" And so I was like, all right. And he's like, well, so why you allow that to happen? All right. And so he says, why are you allowing that to happen? That if you're an adult, you should follow your own moral code. And he says, I'm not trying to attack you in any way. He said, but just think about that. And so I thought about it. And I was like, this man is correct. Why am I allowing this other set of laws and codes to dictate how I live my life? And it's not actually promoting me anywhere in life. It actually upgraded my security level. And I was always in the hole. And I was angry all the time. And I really hated myself because I couldn't be myself. I still knew who I was at the time. I was just hiding it for so long. And so I ended up talking to the head, and I told him, I said, listen, I'm a juvenile lifer. I said, I might have a chance to go home. And I said, but if I continue this life, I'm never going to go home. And he's like, I understand. I said, my views just don't line up with what it is, So he gave me a respectful drop on my flag, and he ended up putting a no touch on me, so that none of the brothers could jump me for what they viewed as a betrayal, And he did it under the compromise that I would have to cover up my ink within 2 months. And I covered up all my ink that I had, But to me today, the only time I could even justify an act of violence is through the act of self-defense. And that's if somebody is harming you. And even then, only to the point where the individual is no longer harming you, and then you must cease. If I was on the streets, I'd have no problem going to the police if somebody was harming me or someone did harm me. Or to me, it would be one of those things. It's a normal thing because it's what a law-abiding citizen should do. And so yeah, I ended up getting out of that, and I stepped away from as much of the violent shit as I could in my life, and it's gotten a lot better ever since.
That's good. That's a good progress from where you were, 19, 18 years ago?
Yeah, that was all the way up until 10 years ago is when I officially left the organization.
So, nowadays in prison, what programs or therapies have helped you reflect and grow as a person?
So it's kind of interesting because a lot of people think that the corrections doesn't help you when they actually do have a lot of programming there set up for you, but they're not just going to hand it to you. They expect you to take your responsibility as an adult to seek out these programs to better yourself. And so that's exactly what I did. I don't want to come back. I don't plan on coming back, and I'm never coming back because in my mind, there's always a way to make money legally when I get out. There's no reason to come back for more illegal activities. It doesn't matter if I have to eat a frickin' ramen noodle soup for dinner when I get out. That's 20, 30 cents out there. So you can't tell me I can't hustle up 20 to 30 cents that day to eat food. A lot of people lose sight, and because they're losing sight, they're coming back. And they feel that they don't have hope, but everything here is set up for you to succeed as long as you allow it to do so, and you have the responsibility to do it. I got my HSED. I almost completed my trades program, but I got transferred out the joint before I could. I had taken college math and college of communications, written and oral. I passed those. I've done CGIP. I did restorative justice, growing a greener community. And I also did my anger management. The one that they gave you was crap, but I still went out my way and took the one on the tablet. And the one on the tablet was far more severe than that. And I also realized I had to deal with my past traumas. So I read a lot of Brene Brown, which was a lot of her self-help books and stuff. I read a lot of that stuff, and her books truly helped me get through a lot of the traumas from my past and realize it's not my shame, it's somebody else's shame for the things that transpired against me. But at the same time, take responsibility for my actions and understand that my actions are not an indication and do not dictate who I am as a person. Just shows that I've made bad decisions. That all my future and present decisions are mine to make, and they can be for the better or they can be for the worst. And I want to make sure that all my future decisions are for the worst, are for the better, sorry. But are for the better. And that's what I've been doing. You know? And that's why I'm
All
finally...
calls other than properly placed attorney calls may be monitored and recorded.
That's why I've been down here for close to 5 years in a medium security facility. It's because I've been making the right decision.
Well, that's good. So what message would you want young people to hear so they avoid a similar path that you went down?
Things can seem extremely bleak, like nobody is there to understand and nobody can understand what you're going through. But there's others out there that are going through the same thing. And you can reach out to anybody, even if you think that that person's not going to listen, or you think some random person is not going to listen. You can go up to a random person or go up to if you have to, go to a police officer and say, I have to seriously talk to you about something that's going on in my life. They will literally sit down and listen. There's nothing wrong with admitting if you don't know how to do something. There's nothing wrong with admitting that you're struggling. Everybody struggles to think that nobody does and that everything is perfect. That is not what life is. And life does actually get better. And there's no reason to nucleify your whole life because you feel that nobody understands. When there are so many other avenues to take to better it.
So, in recent years, you've been transitioning in prison. Can you tell me what that journey has been like for you?
Yeah, so up till the time I actually came out as a transgender woman, I actually suffered from severe depression and suicide ideology every single day. In 2012, I actually succeeded. I overdosed intentionally because I looked in the mirror and I just kept seeing the woman that I was, and if I saw it, everybody else saw it, and it freaked me out. So I ended up reacting, and I overdosed it. I got to the hospital. I flatlined for 2 minutes. I was brought back, and I sat there in the hospital for 3 days. I was in the process. It was around Christmas of 2020.
1 minute remaining.
I ended up overdosing, or not overdose. I was trying to. I can call you back at 5 o'clock, and then we can wrap that up. Yeah. So it was in around Christmas of 2020. My depression hit really hard, and so I'm sitting there. I'm getting ready to actually hang myself, and had the noose tied up and everything. I was going to do. A lot of people know about it. When you squat down, you hyperventilate and huff up and down really fast, and you stand up and you'll black out, right? So I squat in the squatting position. I start hyperventilating, huffing really fast. And as I'm doing this, I have this weird moment of clarity where, I can be myself one time. I got one shot just to be me. That what I was doing at that moment would always be an option, but it was a final option. And if I did it at that time, nobody was going to know who I was. they were going to know this facade of a person who tried to live for everybody else in the way they thought I should live my life instead of me just living my truth. And so I stood up, sat on the bunk, and cried. I wrote to a friend of mine, and I asked her because she was transitioning. And I asked her, I said, how do I start transitioning? You know, and while I was waiting for her to write me back, I had sent a Christmas email out, mass email, to friends and family. And I told them, that there was a lot of changes in my life and that I was tired of living the lie and that I was going to transition and that I was going by Erica because it was one extra letter and it was easy for everybody to transition to that. So my friend writes me back and she tells me how to start doing that. So I wrote PSU and let them know it's something that I've been hiding for a long time and I'm tired of hiding. And everybody else that was in my corner was like, yeah, we pretty much already knew. So I got a huge kick out of it because they're like, they already knew about it. And I was like, well, how the hell did you know? And they're like, there's just certain things about you that just wasn't right. It was you had more of the female quality about you. It's something we just recognized, but it wasn't our place to say nothing because we didn't want to offend you or hurt you. And so I ended up getting my undergarments and everything right out the gate. And when I put them on for the first time, I just bawled because I no longer felt naked. And they told me they wanted me to live registered like that for 6 months before they would make a recommendation to the Department of Corrections headquarters here in Wisconsin before they would let me push for hormone treatment. So I did that for 6 months, and then they requested that I see a specialist, and it took me another 6 to 8 months to see the specialist. And it was right before my birthday. They approved me for hormone therapy, and they diagnosed me with gender dysphoria. And I had started my hormones. I've been on hormones for over 3 years now. And it was a year after hormones, I got approved for gender reassignment surgery, which I'm currently waiting for. I started my transition when I was in Wisconsin Secured Program Facility, which was the old Supermax, but it still ran as if it were a triple max because you only come out with 20 people at a time. I started my transition there, and I ended up getting transferred down to medium, and so I've been transitioning down here ever since. And when I did start my transition, all my suicidal thoughts went out the window. And no longer had that constant, a voice in the back of my head just telling me to end it. And the further I've gotten in my transition, the happier I've become in my life. And everything's coming back around. I got in contact with 2 of my siblings that I ain't seen since I was 14 years old, let alone talk to them on the phone since ever. So we're starting to get back into each other's lives. And my other cousins on my mom's side are finally coming back into my life, and it's not for a lack of trying from my half or their half. It's just they kept getting the wrong information from individuals from my dad's side of the family. And it was really hard because when I found out about that, I found out that my little sister, who no longer is actually Winona, he's Gabriel, he's transgender. So one of my siblings, out of the 3 of us, 2 of us are transgender. So that was kind of entertaining to find that out. And my brother Chris, he's bisexual. But I found out more about that side of the family is most of that side is actually part of the community. And it kind of made me wonder if that was why my other side of the family tried to keep me from that side, because that side has strong support for them and strong support for people that are like me. You know, I've run across very ignorant people, and surprisingly, a lot of white individuals that are very ignorant. I've come across a lot of black guys that are very, very ignorant about this situation. I had a couple old guys that are like, well, you're always a man, you're going to be a man, this and that, and you're just sick pervert, you're a fag, whatever, and the Bible says this. And then, so my response is always this. I said, for an individual who comes from a group that doesn't like to be discriminated against, disliked because they are who they are, and that is who they are, and doesn't agree with prejudice, I said, you are very quick to discriminate and prejudice against me for me being who I am. And a few days later, you're exactly correct on that. He goes, I apologize. You're exactly correct. And I don't really have a place in my heart right now, pretty much anymore, for hate. I don't have a place in my heart for discrimination of any kind, because we're all human beings in the end, and we all want the same thing.
All calls other than properly placed attorney calls may be monitored and recorded.
Which is love, acceptance, and peace. To each their own. That's always been supposed to be the fact. This is the United States of America, the homeland of freedom. And the fact of freedom is to be able to live your life as you would want to live your life, as long as it doesn't harm another person. And I think a lot of people today forget that when they're preaching hate rhetoric against trans people or gay people or other individuals for things that they can't change. You're stepping in on their rights and their freedom because you don't understand, but it's not for them to understand. It's that person's right to be themselves. And nobody should be able to tell them otherwise, as long as they're not hurting somebody. But my transition has been very well since I've been incarcerated. I was shut down for transfer to TCI. I had pushed for transfer to a female facility in compliance with the DAI policy. The Department of Corrections denied me my transfer, even though they have the policy saying I can, over a minor conduct report, mind you. 1 ticket in 4 years, and they used that against me. But I already know it's really based off because of the fact that I haven't had my operation, and they're just discriminating on that, which I had to file a complaint, which subsequently I'll end up filing a lawsuit. But my biggest battle so far, other than getting approved for the surgeries and everything, was it was on Friday. So it was on Friday. I had a court proceeding for a legal name change. Usually the Department of Corrections fights against name changes, and they actually gave me approval. The court approved me for my name change, including to change my name on my birth certificate. So I'm legally and officially known as Erica Jordan, or not Erica Jordan. It's Erica Rizzo Hainstock. I always went with the name Rizzo because it reminds me of Rizzo from Greece. She was somebody who always played tough and strong, but she held a lot of her emotions in, and she hurt very deep, when it mattered. And a lot of people misunderstood her. So that's why I went with Rizzo as my middle name. But I was so happy when that happened. I damn near bawled. It's just nice to be able to have my name know that it's mine, and not an alias, as it were. And it's a slow, hard battle because people don't understand. But and then it's like I said, it's who can understand? I try to break it down the best way that I can with people. I said, take somebody who is a natural born woman or a natural born man. You've lived 20, 30 years, 40 or 50 years in the same exact body. But say you wake up tomorrow and everything you've known is the opposite. You're going to freak out. And that's a life that we live every single day. It's living in a Halloween costume that we know is not ours. But it's too much for other people to understand.
So to close this out today, let's talk about a book you've written. It's actually a prison cookbook. Tell me what all that is about.
Yeah, so a long time ago, when I was in Green Bay, I had a lot of people that would ask me to cook food for them because I'm very unique in my taste, and the way I cooked didn't violate any of the DAI policies. So I wrote my first cookbook, and it was called the Wisconsin Prison Cookbook, 33 step-by-step ways to free your taste buds. I've always firmly believed that just because you're incarcerated doesn't mean that your taste buds or flavor should be incarcerated. So taking the very limited supply of what we're offered on commissary and making it into something that you can feast on that tastes like home cooking. Stuffed summer sausages cooked in a beef stew, those types of things. Barbecue chicken and cheese-filled dumplings. I do all these different things, including my cheesecakes. And those are the things that were in my first cookbook. I am actually currently, which is also on Amazon and everything, but I'm actually currently writing my second cookbook, which is the Wisconsin Prison Cookbook Volume 2, No Noodles Required. In this cookbook, you don't need ramen noodles at all to make any of the food. It's all beans, rices, meats, and cheese. It got stuff in there like quesadillas and prison cannolis and all kinds of other really good options, including drinks and homemade barbecue sauces and stuff. And that one I'm hoping to have done and completed and published by June of next year. But everything comes in good time.
Right. Well, that's exciting.
It was something that compiled for a long time, and I actually got it published in 2019.
I know of at least one prisoner in Wisconsin custody that has seen the cookbook in the facility, so that's pretty interesting.
I really love coming across people that have it. I've had a lot of people come up that have had it, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's you! Could you, sign it?" And I try to tell people that I don't want to sign anything because I don't want somebody to construe what it is. My cooking methods and the stuff that I put in there was so that people don't have to violate any of the rules. The last thing I want is for somebody to make something that's in these meals and break the rules and get in trouble. That's the last thing any of us need, is to get in trouble for just trying to fill our stomach. And so when I get people that get them and they're just like, "Man, it tastes like home," or "It tastes like grandma's food," or, it doesn't taste like it came from the commissary. It puts a huge smile on my face because I know that they're truly enjoying it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. So, is there anything you would like the public to know about yourself or your case before we conclude today?
Well, I'm currently working on a sentence modification, and I'm hoping that I can get my 30 years before eligibility pushed to a 20 years before eligibility. We all change. We're not the same people we were back when we were kids. I was a very dumb 15-year-old, and I was gullible to a lot of things. And now here I am, a full-fledged woman, and I'm changing into a better person. A lot of us do want to do good things when we get out there, and that's my goal. And I know there's a lot of people that want to do good when they get out there, and then there's people that will come back. And it's just sad that that is the case, but it is the reality of the matter. And I'm a very loving, caring person. I'm a Jane of all trades. I can pretty much do anything if I put my mind to it. I love to talk, and I'm very deeply intellectual when it comes to thinking about things fully and thoroughly. And I also try to see things from everybody else's view too. You can't truly have a conversation with somebody if you don't, try to see where they're coming from. They might not change your opinion, but that's not the point. It is to try to see what they see. And if you can, cool. If you can't, that's all right too. you know, uh, that's something that I learned through all the years.
That was my interview with convicted murderer Erica Hainstock. Thank you for listening. See you on the next one.